Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. As people are trickling in, if you want to put your name in the chat and let us know your home city, where you're timing in from, that would be great, just so we get to know everyone. For those of you who haven't been here before, my name is Jodi Roberts, and I'm part of Art and Climate Action, excuse me, which is a collective of arts professionals based in the Bay Area. As some of you know, Art and Climate Action is part of a community of initiatives that together are called the Partners for Arts Climate Targets, otherwise known as PACT. And we are thrilled to co-host this morning's meeting with fellow PACT members, Galleries Commit, and today Gallery Climate Coalition, which is headquartered in London. GCC launched in 2020 formally, and it has created a community of more than 550 member organizations in 20 countries on 6 different continents. And as such, it's been absolutely key in advocating for sustainability across the international arts sector. Central to GCC's effort has been the creation of a carbon emissions calculator that's designed especially for arts institutions. So we're thrilled to have Aoifa Fannin here today from London to tell us about the development of this tool and to clue us into what GC is learning as more and more arts organizations use this tool. And in addition to its London-based, GCC has satellite groups in Italy, in Berlin, and in LA. So after Aoifa, we're going to hear from Kelsey Shell, who's a member of both Art and Climate Action and GCC LA. She's going to tell us a little about her experience using the calculator at her own workplace, and also let us know how she addressed the data that she learned from that calculation with her colleagues. I'm sure it was a great conversation. And of course, we'll leave just a couple minutes at the end for questions. I know we have advised a lot of you that this is a fantastic tool, and so we're really pleased to have the chance to talk to the source and ask a few questions about how the tool is being used. So with that, Aoife, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jodi, and yeah, thank you to everyone at ACA for inviting GCC to present today. My name is Aoifa Fannin, and I am project coordinator at Gallery Climate Coalition. And in today's session, I am planning to provide a quite basic introduction and quick demonstration of the GCC's carbon calculator tool, as well as just discussing the process of emissions reporting. So to give an overview of emissions reporting and how the calculator came into being, in the last few years, there's been a rapid increase in awareness of climate issues, but we all now know that this awareness needs to convert into action. We know that at all levels of society, we need to rapidly decarbonize if we have any chance of curbing the worst projected outcomes of the climate crisis. And I know I don't need to convince anyone in the audience of that here. But GCC comes into this because as an organization like ACA, we are committed to reducing the carbon emissions of the art world by at least 50% by 2030. So that's in line with the Paris Climate Agreement. And all of our members agreed to adhere to that goal. But in order to set an individual reduction target, you obviously need to know where you're starting from. So at GCC, we advise members to conduct annual carbon reports using our free carbon calculator in order to understand the emissions that you're responsible for, as well as to work out the targets that your organization should be working towards. So the GCC calculator tool was developed by ArtLogic founder Peter Chater, who's also a co-founder of GCC, with some help and guidance from Danny Chivers, who is an environmental researcher and climate change consultant, who's part of the consultancy team working on GCC. As Jodi mentioned, it's one of the first carbon data tools to come from directly within the art industry, and it's therefore tailored specifically for galleries and related organizations to use. The tool was designed to be reliable and robust, so we recommend that it's used to get an idea as to what your first steps on climate action should be. Knowing what's causing the majority of your emissions will help guide immediate decisions on what to do and where to act first. So I'm going to share my screen and give you a quick run through. Can everyone see that? Cool. So this is the calculator. It can be found on the GCC website, so at this URL. And we've aimed for the calculator to be as accessible as possible. So it's free to use. You don't even need to be a GCC member to use the calculator, but we do recommend that users do register just to ensure that their data is saved correctly within their account. So I won't go through every section in detail because we don't have a huge amount of time this morning, but I would point out the available supporting materials, which are here at the top, which offer more in-depth guidance and information about what's included in the calculator and why, and some of the metrics that underpin it. And as well as the supporting materials, GCC also offers regular calculator workshops, which are usually on demand. So if you were interested in attending one of those, you can just let me know and we can get one scheduled. So in the calculator, we've tried to strike a balance between ease of use and accuracy. And from our preliminary research, it's clear that there's three main areas of carbon emissions associated with most arts organizations. And those are travel, shipping, and building energy use. And because these three categories will almost certainly make up the great majority of your annual carbon footprint, the calculator focuses on these areas, and we advise that you gather data as accurately as you can for these three sections. So I've already entered in some data to give you a rough idea of what a report might look like. And as you can see at the top here, there's this interactive data representation graphic that allows you to build a kind of picture of your overall emissions as you fill in the calculator. So to show you how it works, say for example, we fill in travel. If I was taking a journey from London to New York, you enter in the route. You can select from these variables, so whether it was a one-way or return flight. And I always like to point out here the difference between economy and first class flights. If you look at the carbon total here, you can see that an economy flight is about 5 times less carbon intensive as the first class flight. And that's because more people can fit into an economy flight. So yeah, the amount of carbon assigned to each passenger is a lot lower. So yes, you fill in the details here. You can say how many times you did that journey that year or how many people were on that journey, and the calculator works out the carbon total, and this gets added up here and also to your total down here. I'll show you again for shipping. It's fairly similar. So say we were doing the same route, but this time via air freight. You would fill in the route, whether it was one way or return. You'd fill in the weight of the item, and the calculator works out the rest. So I won't fill in every section, and I would also point out that there's instructions in each section if you had any questions on those. But just to save some time, I will skip down to the optional sections. And the reason why these down here are optional is because they usually relate to activities with lower emission impacts, which doesn't mean to say it's that these sections are unimportant or that changes don't need to be made in these areas. But ultimately, these activities will represent a relatively low proportion of emissions. So we say if you're pressed for time, or if you have a very small team and not a lot of resources to spend on doing a carbon report, then yeah, these areas shouldn't be prioritized. But saying that, it's of course dependent on your operations. So it is possible that some areas may turn out to be more significant than expected. So if, for example, you produce a lot of printed material, then it would be worth gathering data on this section and filling it in that as accurately as possible, just to make sure you're getting a kind of a clear overall picture of your emissions. So there are various ways the calculator can be used. The tool can be used on a project basis. So we know, for example, Artist Commit and some of their climate impact reports use the calculator on a project basis. It can also be used just for quick estimates to inform decision making. So say, for example, you were making a decision about sending an artwork and you wanted to see the emissions comparison of air freight versus road freight. You could just plug in the details you have and quickly see an emissions comparison of that. But generally, we advise members to use the tool to complete annual carbon reports, as we find that's the best way to get a full picture of your overall emissions, and it means nothing can kind of fall between the cracks. And as daunting as that may seem, to assemble all of this data, especially on an annual basis, to reassure you, you should have all of this data saved within your financial records. So it's definitely worth speaking to your finance departments. It's also worth speaking to your registrars and potentially suppliers that you work with and letting them know that you're doing a carbon report and that you might be coming to them to ask for data. And to aid with data collection, GCC recommends that members form green teams. So this is an internal team that's dedicated to sustainability within your organization. And really making carbon reporting a primary responsibility for that team. And another way that GCC is working to make the process of carbon reporting easier is through standardization. So as part of our upcoming sustainable shipping campaign, which we will be launching on Earth Day this month, we will be encouraging suppliers to include emission comparisons on quotes and standardized data on invoices for shipments so that you have all of that data there and you can easily pull that together for your carbon report. So just a note on the data. So the data submitted through our calculator is protected and anonymized. So we don't have access to your results unless you submit them to us. But we do encourage members to publish their results via our website. And this is an attempt to promote transparency and collegiality across the sector. We find that making the results available helps to establish best practice, it helps to track progress, and it also helps to build up a bank of data, which in turn allows GCC to better understand the impacts of the industry and therefore refine our tools and improve our research. So I've tried to fit in a lot here, so I hope that was clear and not too quick. But as I said, there are some amazing supporting materials that are available on the website that go into much more detail on usage and on the metrics behind the calculator. So it's definitely worth looking at those if you have further questions. And before I hand over to Kelsey, I just wanted to say something about the momentum behind carbon reporting in the industry. So GCC launched the calculator in October 2020, and since then the organization has grown from a group of 14 founders to an international membership of nearly now 800 members. So this includes galleries, nonprofits, museums, artist studios, and art sector businesses, all of which are aligned on the target of a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. We now have voluntary teams in LA, Berlin, Italy, and London, with further groups set to launch who are working on expanding the GCC tools and research on a local level. And while this speed of expansion and enthusiasm is, of course, motivating, our focus has always been and continues to be on the importance of taking action. So I just wanted to highlight that arguably one of the most important steps in taking action is using the calculator to better understand the emissions associated with your operations and can then taking effective actions to reduce those. So that is me. And on that note, I will hand over to Kelsey, who's going to be discussing her own experience of this.
Thank you so much, Aoife. And I feel like embarrassed to talk about how I'm using the tool with one of the creators of the tool on the call. But here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Also, I am Kelsey Shell. I'm the director of public art at the Art Advisory's Law Buell & Associates. And can you see this document? I'm always like, am I sharing all my private secrets on the internet? Good. And I'm also a co-founding member of Art and Climate Action and the LA chapter of Gallery Climate Coalition. So this is a fun coming together of worlds. For anyone who just saw Aoife's wonderful presentation and thought, where am I going to find all of those materials? And also, like, I'm an artist, art world person. I haven't taken math since high school. I don't know how to do an audit. Like, I'm your girl. I found all of this really daunting. So I tried to break it down into a quick, easy kind of workflow. For me, it started with kind of getting the buy-in for me to spend like company time working on this and why it mattered. And I'm lucky that that conversation was essentially saying to my bosses, who already knew I were involved in these groups, I want to do this. And they were like, great. So I was kind of nervous that they were going to say, no, don't waste your time at work on that. And they were really into it. So buy-in was easy. Then it really became compiling materials, which again, I thought would be like a huge stumbling block, and that it would involve getting everyone in the team on board to share information. And it turns out, as Aoife said, really all of these different records are saved already by the company for financial reasons. So it came down to finding shipping records, travel schedules for my coworkers, and then overall energy usage. So I was really excited to share with you like all of our internal information. And I realized, like, obviously all of the information has to be redacted because it's completely confidential. But here is what, I was using minus all of the useful information, essentially. This is our internal transit records in our database. And it basically for us means the artwork name, artwork type, then that comes with kind of the weight and dimensions, the current location, where it went. And then if you click into each record, it kind of gives the additional transit that might have occurred. So I used this to kind of go through each shipment. I ran a report for 2019, and I'd like put on a TV show and just kind of do data entry. It was actually really painless and quick. And I was amazed at, if I knew the weight of one framed photograph that was 40 by 60, if I didn't have the next one that was a comparable work, I hope this isn't sacrilegious. I just, instead of going crazy, was like, I'm sure it's similar to this weight, let's move on. So that was how I approached it, was, let's make this happen and not kill ourselves over being completely precise. So in terms of the transit, that was really simple. We mostly also use air freight when we have to, and road freight when we can. So it was also really simple to understand that. We're all trying to move towards sea freight, but I know that my company only uses that right now for outdoor sculpture. So that was an easy kind of, I knew how to enter that data. And if you don't have that access, our company is really small, bringing in a registrar or someone has that information and kind of just downloading from them what are our standard practices, then you could kind of make those estimations yourself. Like Basel to San Francisco, it's either going to be sea freight or air freight. What would the company normally do? And you could kind of go from there. I then used our energy statement, which again, we don't own our building, but our landlord, after me twisting his arm for about a month, produced our year's worth of energy statements. And over here in the corner, it just gives us our meter readings. So it was, again, I was like, how am I going to find this? And I was like, of course, we just have those bills because we paid them. Same goes with travel. I thought that it would be, me kind of getting everyone to tell me all of the airplanes they went on all year. I forgot that we track all company travel in our company schedule. So that was another place where it was like, thinking more like, where is this resource, not who holds this information, because it existed. So that was an easy way to understand that. So really doing the audit, so easy. The tool is really just straightforward. This is what we ended up with. And like Aoife said, I really pushed for us to just share this information. So I believe we submitted it to GCC because I really think it's important. First of all, nothing on here is confidential because it's not saying a client name, it's not saying an artwork name. It's really just showing where the movement of things and people. And so this shows you, the route, what kind of trip it was, the class. This is for travel. and then the carbon. So going through, this is our shipping. We do a lot of shipping. Energy, and then we ended up with this number. And even with me, I've done a lot of, I'm in a lot of these kinds of Zoom calls, banging our heads against the wall, trying to figure out what to do in our sector. So I thought, I'll know exactly what to do. And then I got this number and was like, okay, but what next? So I turned to Haley Mellon, who I believe is on the call and is, an absolute lifeline for everyone in our community. An artist and a conservationist, and runs Art to Acres, which is a land conservation organization. And ahead of my meeting with the team internally, I wanted to know if they said, okay, what would we're moving away from offsets, but what can we do if we want to have long-term goals, but also use funds to offset or, work on our numbers. So Haley was really helpful in thinking through those reasons or options. Then we had an annual meeting in my office about other things, and I put this on the agenda and shared our report and created this handout that is mostly GCC research. If you haven't gone through the website, there's a lot to dig into there. That's super helpful. Just looking at basically the two things I knew would be the immediate changes we could make based on our kind of pie chart of our emissions, which was 70% air travel. And that's not the case for all businesses, but as an advisory, we're kind of going around the world, and that's, to see art, and that's not going to change. So it's how can we change our practices, not change the entire industry right in this second. So that means flying economy, which was a tough conversation, if I'm going to be honest. Not a popular one, but I will say that everyone flew economy to the next art fair, which may not sound like a big victory, but was huge. And I am a remote worker. My company's based in San Francisco, and I'm in LA. There's another team member who's in New York. And we both have tried to use these like limiting of impact rules to guide how we travel back and forth for meetings. So that was a really useful touch point in just that specific relationship in the company of like, can I be on Zoom and not come to the install? Can I, group all of my meetings into 1 week instead of coming out 4 times in a month, which I can tell you, my boyfriend prefers that I don't do that too. So it's happy for everyone. So this was just like a thing I could give people and say, like, don't be scared. We're in it together. Here's some tiny things we can do, not just like completely change everything immediately. I also, like I said, wanted to talk about the compensation schemes and kind of the issues with offsetting, and that like just checking the box when you buy an airplane ticket isn't, that's a very 90s solution. And let's like actually be thoughtful about if you're going to use funds, be thoughtful that it's actually going to be put towards things that have a long lifespan and will actually help with drawdown. So I included in here, Art to Acres, Client Earth, all these kind of organizations we're happy with. And then also brought in the idea of insetting, which is essentially raising funds to invest in infrastructure and systems internally that it's not just putting money out in the earth, out of the world and saying like plant trees. It's saying we're going to create a composting program, and that is going to have a direct impact on like our footprint. So not surprising that a lot of these things are big picture goals and less immediately actionable, but it was a really meaningful first conversation. And now it's more on the table, just as like a conversation in the office. It's like a comfortable thing that people bring up, like, we're doing this project. Like, I wonder if we can do sea freight, is a conversation that wouldn't have happened before having this audit. So that was alone really meaningful. And my bosses decided to opt for contributing to the Galleries Commit and Art to Acres project in Peru as kind of an art sector major land conservation project. And that was really meaningful to also come together and not just I think it's important not to just like silently make these efforts, but to let people know what you're doing, not as kind of a self-congratulatory practice, but more of a like coalition building practice of saying to your peers and vendors and collectors, like, this matters to us and it should matter to you if you're going to work with us. So that's kind of my next phase, is creating a collector group, which I'm kind of banging every drum anyone will listen to me about who wants to join me in creating tools for collectors to better understand their part of the equation, because I think they drive a lot of, at least the commercial art world's decisions, but also getting shippers on board, which I know is a huge GCC agenda item, especially for this month. So that's really my whole thing. The end. Stopping share. And if anyone has questions, I'm really happy to just talk with you now or offline about any of this, because it's not scary and totally fun and a positive thing.
Well, thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you so much, Aoife. Are there any questions that you all have right away? I know some of you are working with the calculator now. No. While you're thinking, I was going to ask, Kelsey, do you plan on doing a 2020 to compare to 2019?
Yes, I should have mentioned that we decided to do 2019, as many people did, because 2020 was unusual. And I am very curious to do a 2020 and see, especially because at least for our business, the shipping of artworks didn't really reduce, in March 2020, it certainly did, but things picked up pretty quickly. But people stopped traveling for a long time. And I think our heirs and the air and the planet were so happy about that. And I would love to see like how that actually worked out in our audit.
All right. Well, please go ahead.
Jessica has a question.
Yeah, I do. So as I mentioned in my intro, I actually do some sustainability finance. So I'm interested in it kind of on a work side too. And I can see lots of different content creators who might be interested in this tool, but I'm always really hesitant because I've had live websites, to put too much traffic. This is obviously made for gallerists. So I'm wondering, do you have plans to publicize it to a wider community, or is it mostly for gallerists and maybe people right adjacent to gallerists, as opposed to say all of Etsy? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally. I think it was aimed for galleries. So kind of all the different sections are aimed at areas of operations that are common to galleries and similar organizations, but we totally welcome anyone to use the calculator. So if it's useful to people within your network, then please do share. It's a free tool and it's there to guide everyone. So yes, please do go ahead.
I will say, sorry, Jessica, was just to add to that. I have seen people just do one particular part of the calculator. So Kelsey and Aoife were talking about using the thing in its entirety, but if you only wanted to do shipping or only wanted to do travel, it's also incredibly helpful, especially on a time period by time period basis.
That's why I went straight to Etsy, because they, it's a whole group of people who are doing, different kinds of things to sell, but kind of in alignment with artistic sensibilities. So they would probably appreciate being able to contribute in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, Roxanne, go ahead.
Oh, yes. Hi, my name's Roxanne Smith. My colleague Ramsey Colbert and I are calling in from the Whitney Museum in New York. Thank you all for including us. I'm curious if these tools are being used yet by art museums, to your knowledge. So if they're like comparable stats for museums or examples of art museums that are leaders in this area.
Yes, definitely being used by museums. We have some examples of museums based here in the UK that I could share with you. And I think Haley's on this call, who's been advising several museums in the US. So yeah, if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, we could definitely have a conversation about that. But
That would be really
generally,
neat.
yeah, the tool, cool. Yeah, let's do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I know
Yeah.
I was,
Sorry,
gonna,
go ahead,
I was
Kelsey.
waiting for Jodi to jump in. No, you go.
No, I was just going to say, given that GCC has done this work of locating, doing the research into what are the biggest emitters, and they are activities that are common to so many art spaces, travel, shipping, etc. It does seem applicable. I know that it's applicable for nonprofit art spaces and larger institutions as well. So
And just our behemoth buildings too.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And I actually had a question for Aoife, if you could talk
Kelsey,
a little.
your office's energy bills, just like nice.
I know. We're like not agree. We're like 10 people in an office, you know, not really relevant to the Whitney, but you know, we try.
I can't even imagine what it is. So probably so shocking.
A terrifying number. Yeah.
Aoife, can you tell us just a little bit about the importance of creating benchmarks across the art sector in general? I know you hit upon it, but it's something that is just starting to happen. So it's like participation on a large scale really does matter.
Totally, yeah. And we found creating this tool that there's just no data out there, which means it's hard to know what the industry is producing in terms of carbon. And yeah, benchmarking is just impossible if you don't have any figures to base that off of. So yes, the more people that use the calculator, the more figures we have, and then that will definitely, yeah, it can advise the next steps going forward for the whole industry.
Put the general GCC website in there. Well, we've hit our half an hour mark. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. Aoife very generously put her personal email in the chat. And please reach out to Art and Climate Action if you have any questions. We can direct you to the right place or try to answer them ourselves. We're always happy to keep the conversation going and provide as many answers as possible. So thank you all. We will have our next community meeting about circularity and creating circular networks for the reuse of materials within arts institutions next month. So keep your eyes open for news on that. And again, share with anyone and everyone on your organizations and teams. We'd love to keep talking. All right. Thanks, everyone.